The big issue with Manchester United's 4-3-3 today on the Premier League review, we're going to be taking a look at the issues that are causing Erik Ten Hag's team to have a real problem in the first phase of play. I'm, of course, Statman Dave. Subscribe if you're new. Anyway, let's dive straight into the tactics. Manchester United had a frustrating 1-0 win over Wolverhampton Wanderers. Of course, late drama with a VAR penalty decision went in the favour of Manchester United and they picked up the 3 points. But Manchester United really struggled to play through the lines. The first phase of Manchester United's play with their back sort of 5 players plus Andre Onana really struggled to play through the Wolves block. This has kind of been a common theme for Manchester United over the last 4-5 seasons, from Ole Gunnar Solskjaer to Ralf Rangnick to Erik Ten Hag, of course, to a much lesser extent. But Manchester United's problem versus Wolves is that they're two distinct units. Their attack and their defence were very much disjointed, with the progression only really coming to the wide areas to Anthony and Alejandro Garnacho, with not enough passes going through the midfield to Casemiro, Marcus Rashford or Mason Mount. That's something that needs to change. Manchester United's build-up needs a lot of work. I think one of the issues that you have in this situation is that United don't manipulate the first line very, very well. When I'm talking about that, it's manipulating the two forwards. Wolves very much set up in a 4-4-2. We've seen Man United play this setup many times, a 4-4-2, a 5-4-1, but really getting bodies behind the ball, meaning that United have to find those angles to break through. What United didn't do against Wolves is kind of manipulate the spaces between that attacking line and their midfield line, using the likes of Bruno Fernandes as a bounce pass to maybe then play through, or alternatively Mason Mount dropping in as well. I think for United there needs to be some adaptation to improve this 4-3-3. I like the idea of it, of having 2 3/8s in Mason Mount and Bruno Fernandes, that when it clicks will only create massive amount of opportunities with underlaps, with combination play in the wide areas, but also looking for those direct balls from both inside channels to the forward running and behind. But I think the big problem right now is actually playing through those lines and getting the attackers the ball. That is a big, big concern. But also the balance of the attacking line isn't quite there for me. I think there needs to be some sort of movement. Let's take a look at a clip from the game and kind of analyse where I feel the problems are for Manchester United in that first phase, and then we'll look into the solutions. Of course, the goal coming from a really good move that I want to kind of break down, and why it was advantageous for Manchester United to have a midfielder in the build-up to that goal, I think is there for all to see. But anyway, let's dive into a little clip on 19 minutes. So I'm going to start looking at the issues for Manchester United against Wolves, but this is going to be applied through the season if they don't find the solutions. Manchester United, very much with Andre Onana now, have a ball-playing goalkeeper that's absolutely fantastic. The issue that United had against Wolves is that Andre Onana became a real main progressive option with his long passing into the feet of forwards or switches out wide. That shouldn't be the case. It should come from the defenders, also midfielders dropping off the line. But we can see as the ball's moved out to Aaron Wan-Bissaka, United clearly building with a 3. But the issue I find right now is there's nobody in this kind of central space manipulating that first two Wolves defenders, and also, trying to get that midfielder to pop inside, which will open up easy progression out wide. Wan-Bissaka is very isolated on the ball, with his only real option is to go back to Raphael Varane. As we mentioned previously, United's build-up with the 3 kind of defenders, Martinez, Raphael Varane and Aaron Wan-Bissaka. And United operating with this double pivot. But this double pivot is massively out of position. We saw Luke Shaw invert at times. My issue with Luke Shaw inverting is sometimes he doesn't look like he's a 360 midfielder, in a sense of he doesn't have the awareness to receive with back to goal, to receive on the half turn, and sometimes he doesn't move enough to get into the areas in the space. But right now for Manchester United, this build-up shape is absolutely horrible. It's terrible. It's not good at all. There's no option to play direct into central areas. The only option is potentially out wide. United, of course, recycle possession, and then we see Luke Shaw and Casemiro move into the positions they should be. If you look at that right now, you've got a left back that's in a slightly inverted position, and a defensive midfielder that is sitting on the left-hand side when the ball's on the right-hand side. The whole idea of playing this short passing style is having players that are supporting the ball player. Players that are giving options to Wan-Bissaka to play to. Wan-Bissaka does get criticised for his lack of progression. I think that is a weakness they need to work on in his game. But in this moment, United are lacking options higher up the pitch. So the ball gets moved back inside. You can see that Martinez is in acres of space. I don't understand why we don't see that pass enough to Martinez. Martinez is by far the best ball-playing defender in United's back four. And that is an option where you could switch it back to left-hand side and you could utilise, Luke Shaw and Casemiro. Still, we've got a problem where there's no real passes. Yes, Varane could probably hit a left-footed, daisy cutter into the feet of Casemiro, but it's quite a hard pass to hit and it's probably not in his skill set. But moving forward, Raphael Varane sort of carries out. He's gesturing to the forwards to move a little bit more. There is a pass on now into the feet of Casemiro. That's not too hard. Again, left-footed into the feet. One of the big concerns I've got with United's defence is United probably got one really comfortable ball player at the back in Lisandro Martinez when playing Luke Shaw, Raphael Varane and Aaron Wan-Bissaka. I mentioned before Luke Shaw's position. What is he kind of offering here? He could be dropping deep into this area, into a left half position and receive a pass straight to feet. He's not really offering anything from a possession perspective. His pass is kind of cut out by Sarabia. So the ball obviously, is on to Casemiro. Casemiro's just checking his shoulder. It could be played to break that first line. It's not. The switch is out to Antony. Frequently we saw this, United going to the wide areas. This isn't a problem, but it means that there's a lot of pressure on your wide players to make things happen. When Alejandro Garnacho had a really poor game for his own high standards, there's issues there. I thought, Antony had a really good game. But moving on to United's kind of, structure and positional game at the moment, it's just not quite there. In a sense of there's nobody in this inside channel supporting Antony. The whole process of building into the final third and Erik Ten Hag's underlapping, free eights, there has to be someone here, be it Mason Mount, or be it Aaron Wan-Bissaka or Bruno Fernandes. There has to be an option here. United's shape is very, very poor. His nearest option from a midfield perspective is Casemiro, who was in central midfield before. United need to fill these positions up better. Positionally, very, very poor, especially in the first half of Manchester United. This highlights a big, big problem. Yes, Antony could go and run and take on Aït-Nouri on the outside, but there needs to be options on the inside. And that's an area where United really need to improve. Antony, Sancho, Rashford, Garnacho, all these players that play wide do very, very well when they have an inside option, and that needs to be improved for United. So obviously United are, there's no real options for Antony. Yes, he could go and take on the wide midfielder in Nunez and Aït-Nouri, but the option is to retain possession. From this position, we've got an issue with Aaron Wan-Bissaka not being able to play that pass into the feet of Casemiro. This is one of the problems with having Aaron Wan-Bissaka in build-up. I think he should be a player that's in that high position, and we'll have a look at why very, very soon. But you think about if this was a midfielder, that pass is probably on to Casemiro. If you're playing a half-back that's dropping to the right of the centre-back in Raphael Varane, you're probably playing that pass into midfield. But unfortunately, United are playing quite a poor progressive side to their defence. And Wolves, you can see them for the entire game, were filtering United down the right side, knowing that they had the two players there that are less, in tune with the ball versus Martinez and Shaw. This is a bit of an issue with United's build-up, because having two players that don't progressive play on one side of the defence means that the passes are going to get, recycled back, and United are going to get to the situation, which we'll see in a minute, where, Wan-Bissaka drops it back to Varane, they work a 1-2, and you go back to Andre Onana. From a position where you've got a switch of play and you've got an opportunity to hit, Wolves. This is the problem. The progressions happen, your winger's got the ball, but unless Antony takes on two players, beats another one on the inside, got a midfielder on the cover as well, beats three men, it's one of those situations where the structure needs to be a lot better in these moments, or we're going to have these situations where, the ball is recycled back to your goalkeeper. Saying that, though, Andre Onana, one of the best ball-playing goalkeepers in the world, this switch of play was one of his highlights, but it was brilliant with his gloves as well, commanded the penalty area. Yeah, he's a little crazy, but I like that. I like that he's got the ability to lead from the back. He's not afraid of situations. One of his saves that he made coming out on one of the Wolves attackers when he dived into his feet, really good save. I like that aggression coming out, but this switch of play, absolutely brilliant to Alejandro Garnacho. But see, in this moment, we've progressed to play twice through long passes to the wingers. There's no central progression, which I think is a big issue for Manchester United, that they need to add that variation to their game. If every single time it's just, a long ball out from centre-back out wide to your winger, and the other side it's just a long ball out from your goalkeeper to the winger, we need to start playing through the middle. And that's been United's problem against Lens and against Wolves in the Premier League. The central progression is a humongous issue. So what this means for Manchester United from a tactical perspective is you're seeing balls either from Onana out wide to Alejandro Garnacho, or we're seeing switches from either Raphael Varane going out to Antony, or frequently we saw Casemiro going wide to Antony, where we're not utilising Manchester United's 3 central dangerous attackers, and that is a big problem. So there's the issues. I think the positional game needs a lot of work, and I think when you look at the stats and we maybe compare it to one of the best possession teams in the Premier League, and that would be Brighton, you kind of start to see a bit of a picture in a sense of this is Manchester United's progression statistics against Wolverhampton Wanderers. And when I'm talking about that right-hand side of the defence, Aaron Wan-Bissaka progressed the play 3 times in the game, Raphael Varane twice. Wan-Bissaka had 50 passes in the game and progressed it 3 times. Raphael Varane, 35 passes, progressed it twice. That isn't good enough, and that's why teams will force Manchester United down the right-hand side of the defence. What I'm talking about there is they'll kind of gear their press super heavy in a sense of like on that left-hand side, super high bodies, and basically, allow you to play those passes wide and then filter out and then press you. And that, it's highlighted by the statistics. And when we compare those progressive passes to, for example, Brighton, as a kind of good example of a team that plays really well, we could see Statman as a fullback, 15 progressive passes. Lewis Dunk, centre-back, 11. Paul Van Heckel, 6. James Milner, 5. These are things where it's directly comparable here, where Manchester United need to improve their part of the game. How do they improve it? Again, you can't just come with problems. You've got to come with solutions. I think Manchester United need to drop one of their midfielders. Either Bruno Fernandes to the base and Aaron Wan-Bissaka high, or alternatively Mason Mount to the base and Bruno Fernandes high. I think there can be variation in games, but having that ability to build with this kind of 3-2 structure will make Manchester United progress to play better. It's going to allow a lot more in terms of, number one, you're causing this, the 2 strikers a lot more problems, knowing that you've got 2 technical midfielders. You then start to open up questions, who jumps out and presses Mason Mount and Casemiro when they receive the ball into feet, which opens up more space in the inside channels for both Wan-Bissaka and Bruno Fernandes. Of course, Wan-Bissaka could be interchangeable with Diogo Dalot. I think both players are different, but both excel in that inside position. Wan-Bissaka, because he played against Wolves, will focus on him. What I like about him is it's almost got like he's almost like the Ben Chilwell of inverted fullbacks, where Ben Chilwell isn't brilliant on the ball. He's not going to, drive at you, take you on, create chances, the ball at his feet, but he's brilliant off the ball. His movement off the ball is absolutely outstanding from that left wing-back position. Wan-Bissaka, I think, is quite similar. I think he's quite active in this position in terms of making moves, dropping off, getting in behind the defence, and then utilising that sort of ability to put a ball in the box. But changing United's build-up is really going to help. When I say the build-up needs to be flexible. Too many times that we saw in the game with that static build-up that there was no motion from players to drop in, to drop out. And I feel like having, a midfielder in there that's comfortable at, dropping to the left, dropping in between the centre-backs. And I think consequently that could push Luke Shaw up into more of an advanced area. So you're starting to create this kind of like left-sided diamond in possession, which again, more options into feet. Having a technically gifted midfielder as well means those passes are a lot easier to pull off. And I think that could be centre, I think it could be on the left as well. And this could be Bruno Fernandes. And I think that's the beauty of it, that Mount and Fernandes could switch in terms of who's dropping deep, who's playing high and so forth. And I think that would give United a lot more variability, but very, very important having Aaron Wan-Bissaka as this inside, right player, I think is just going to help United in the build-up. I think at the moment it's too poor. I think having Luke Shaw in a deep area as well, if United are going to kind of go, in a certain phase with the 2 defensive midfielders higher, that's a lot better than having Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Raphael Varane and Martinez. You've got Shaw, Martinez and Varane. Better progression there. I think one of the other things that, was striking was having a striker receiving into feet. Marcus Rashford is so deadly out wide. What I think United need to do until Højlund's back, because Højlund is a progression master in a sense of he's ranked in the top 1% of strikers in European football last season in terms of progressive passes received at 10.99. Until that point, Jadon Sancho is the 9. I think that's got to happen. I think his ability to link the play with kind of really smart little touches is a key point. Allowing Rashford to be 1v1 in a wide area. Rashford is much better in a wide area. I like to see his development as a number 9, but I think right now United need that option. And there's the solutions. Number 1, playing a midfielder deep, playing Aaron Wan-Bissaka high, Jadon Sancho as a 9 in there, and creating passing options, having a rotation of positions, having a lot more flexibility, because the build-up was far too static against Wolves. And hopefully that'll mean United win games. Moving on to kind of a little bit more of that match analysis, I think the central play needs to improve a lot more. Alejandro Garnacho has found his kryptonite. I think in Nelson Semedo, Alejandro Garnacho in the game completed one of his 2 dribbles. But more importantly, you look at the defensive statistics of Nelson Semedo, won 4 out of his 4 tackles, 3 interceptions, 1 block, 2 clearances. And I think actually we go back to the last game that really jumps out between the two sides was the away game. Remember, Marcus Rashford was late for a team meeting, so got dropped. Garnacho started that game. He came up against Nelson Semedo and unfortunately, again, completed 0 of his 2 dribbles. Semedo came out really well in that match, won 100% of his 2 tackles. As soon as Rashford came on and moved to the left wing, you remember the game changed. And that is what United, or Erik Ten Hag, should have done with Sancho and with Rashford in the second half. I think Garnacho maybe now at the moment is the perfect impact sub. He's very, very good. 4 goals coming off the bench for United last season. That's something where United need to utilise him from that position a lot more. Allow Rashford to play in that wide area. I think that will just get, there'll be more danger and so forth from those positions. And I do think, that midfield line and improving that midfield line is only going to help. But a big shout out to Andre Onana, absolutely man of the match for Manchester United. 6 saves in the game, 1 out of 1 of his sweeper keeper action, 26 passes completed, 51 touches of the football, 100% of his ground duels. He was absolutely outstanding for Manchester United and saving Manchester United a whopping 2.35 expected goals. So we spoke about the solutions. Let's take a look at the goal, which I think was a great example of the solutions we're talking about. This situation, though, we've got to make a note that this is from a set piece. So Manchester United are slightly differently organised, which has led to both Christian Eriksen and Bruno Fernandes being in that deep ball-lying position that we're talking about. This didn't happen by construct, this happened by situation. And in fact, it was one of the best moves Manchester United had. We spoke before about Bruno Fernandes or Mason Mount dropping into this deeper area to get on the ball. This is why it's so important. And again, we mentioned Wan-Bissaka. His movement for this goal is absolutely brilliant. Not only does he take the attention of the wide midfielder, Lemina's going to be looking at where he is, and also the fullback has a problem with his movement. But the big thing that I want you to look at is where the midfielders are. Casemiro, again, less of a ball player than Christian Eriksen and Bruno Fernandes. Both of them in deep areas to get on the ball, to progress the play. Think Real Madrid. Toni Kroos, Luka Modric, Casemiro. We saw that so many times when Real Madrid won the 3 Champions Leagues in a row. Casemiro is this weird, deep-lying auxiliary attacking midfielder, allowing the 2 more ball-playing options to get on the ball. But as we move the play on, again, Wan-Bissaka's movement pulls the midfielder out of position, which opens up this sort of central line into the feet of Antony. Again, simple progression out wide, no problem with that, but we need more variance on that central progression. This causes the fullback to jump. It's going to go and press Antony. Wan-Bissaka's going to go the other way and draw the midfield back. Why that's so important for Manchester United, again, we see the fullback move over, the underlap into space. This is what I like about Wan-Bissaka's movement off the ball. It is quite good. He's quite active. He's learnt a lot under Erik Ten Hag in terms of those underlaps. But what this means for United is Antony's going to pull over the two players, the wide midfielder Pedro Neto and Aït-Nouri, the fullback. Wan-Bissaka's going to pull the central midfielder back, which consequently is going to create space for Bruno Fernandes. Again, the ball-playing Bruno Fernandes in a position where he can use his passing range. Fernandes enters the shot. We can see now Wan-Bissaka does really, really well to stay onside. Doesn't, move too early. Nice kind of curved run across the penalty area. Great dink over the top from Bruno Fernandes. Again, in a position where he can receive. Bruno Fernandes and Mason Mount didn't get enough possession. We know how good both of them are on the ball. United need to utilise them more. And having one in the build-up, as we saw there, progress the play, underlap run to pull the defence back and the midfield back, little chip ball over the top, and Man United win the game. And it's arguably as simple as that in sometimes football. Having technical players from a deep area, the underlap from that fullback Aaron Wan-Bissaka position, in behind the defence, utilise of the space, lovely dink over the top, you've left one of the centre-backs up from a corner, you win the game. And that element of kind of this structure, what we're talking about right now, with Bruno getting deep, even at times, having both of the ball-playing midfielders deep and Casemiro high, that is not a bad thing. That will allow United to play through. Football and passing and touch is so important to play through these first lines. And you can see that in the goal that United scored. It's a prime example of midfielders being on the ball in deep areas. But I think in a sense of, the improvements of Manchester United, we spoke from a tactical perspective, about how they can change the build-up, having two ball players at DM or having one of them high with Casemiro. Casemiro as the 6, as Bruno kind of drops in and joins the defence to get on the ball in these deep areas, to then play through, to then play those progressive passes to break lines with Jadon Sancho as a number 9. I think finally one of the things you want to touch on is just Mason Mount. I think his debut was a tough one. I think one of the big things with it is the pass combinations to Mason Mount. We just didn't see enough passes into his feet. When we look at his passes received, there's just not enough that are breaking lines into the number 10 area. I think we've got 2 passes there that get into the final third in central areas from deep. That's something that Man United need to improve. They'll improve that with a Bruno or even Mason Mount dropping deep to get on the ball. But anyway, guys, they've been my thoughts. I think it was a much needed win for Manchester United, but massive room for improvement. There is a big problem with the 4-3-3, but it can be fixed very, very easily. Even signing someone like a Benjamin Pavard or an Amrabat would mean Ten Hag has got another ball player that he can drop into the defensive line, which will allow United to progress the play and score more goals. Hope you've enjoyed the analysis, guys. Get into the comments below. How did you think Man United played against Wolverhampton Wanderers, and how would you sort out their 4-3-3? I've been Statman Dave. Subscribe if you're new, and we'll see you later.